Al Jazeera podcasts.
Today, layers upon layers of trauma lived by the children of Gaza.
I think that the best way to describe what's going on in Palestine is colonial trauma, which is continuous, deliberate, collective, cross-generational.
Where does that colonial trauma leave future generations of Palestinians? I'm Malika Bilal, and this is The Take.
When they enter Rafah, they'll start by killing children. When you pass a decomposing body in the street, it feels like you're in a ghost town. It's extremely frightening, because what happened to these corpses could happen to us.
Hisham al-Attar is a 15-year-old Palestinian in Gaza whose family has been displaced by Israel's bombardments. That hasn't stopped him from doing what he can to help those around him.
I'm from the north of Gaza. They call me the Newton of Palestine. During the war, we didn't have electricity, so I thought I'd light up the place.
Over the course of the war, he's learned to generate electricity to light his family's tent in Rafah, using scraps and household items left behind. His inventions have earned him the nickname Gaza's Newton, after the English scientist Isaac Newton.
I invented the wireless lock, and my last invention was the fan.
But Hisham is still a child living the horrors of war.
When I'm sleeping and scared, I cover my face and close my ears tightly so I don't hear the sound of shelling. We're always afraid of shrapnel that could hit our tent at any moment and set it on fire while we're sleeping.
A whole generation in Gaza has grown up knowing nothing but war, restricted movement, and a lack of basic necessities. For those children, the open-air prison is their only reality, surrounded by death and uncertainty. My guest today knows what that can do to a child and challenges the Western definition of trauma.
My name is Samah Jabr, and I come from Jerusalem. I'm a consultant psychiatrist, and I'm the head of mental health services in the West Bank. And I have a work experience in the past in Gaza. I used to go regularly to help and train colleagues in Gaza. But now, because Gaza is closed, I continue to do that online. We try to support them.
Well, it is really great to have you back on the podcast, though I wish the circumstances were different of what we were talking about. Dr. Jabr, I'd like to start with the story of one boy, a 15-year-old boy, Hisham, a Palestinian in Gaza, who became known as the Newton of Gaza. How representative is someone like Hisham? What does it take to be like that?
It's a very positive picture of the consequences of what's happening here. So we are living in a very traumatic situation that is damaging most people. The point of all this damage and harm that is being inflicted on Palestinians is to impose helplessness on us. And yet some people try to respond in a positive way by wanting to be helpful to those surrounding them. And Hisham is one of these people. In psychology, we call this as adversity advanced development, or in other terms, it used to be called post-traumatic growth. So it's trauma brings a lot of harm to many people, but sometimes people try to defy that by being more energized and wanting to be helpful and do pro-social things to their surroundings.
We're speaking of the story of Hisham, but he is just one of many, many, many children in Gaza who are going through what he's going through. So I want to broaden this out a little if we can, because Many of those who have survived have lost at least one parent. In many cases, they've lost limbs. They're focusing on staying alive, on searching for bits of food when they can to avoid starvation, rather than playing or going to school, things that other kids around the world have the luxury to focus on. How deep of a scar is that leaving them with? What is that doing to them mentally?
I think that this intensity that we are experiencing in Gaza is unprecedented. And it's happening to a population that experienced many disparities before October 2023. Before that time, the population of Gaza suffered from high rates of unemployment, poverty, and food insecurity. And they lived in a cage, but now in a graveyard. So the effect is so huge. The loss, the physical loss that is visible, but also there is a lot of indirect or invisible loss. The loss of the relationships and the connection and the attention of caring adults. The adults are broken and they are busy with their daily survival. Children are dependent on caregivers, and the lack of attention and care and bonding and emotional regulation that can be provided by their parents and the adults surrounding them is a very big loss for them. Somehow it changes their inner capacity to regulate their emotions, and it will affect their attachment style in the future and the way they look at the world and the way they connect to others in the future.
So that's the invisible loss. One of the things that you said that just broke my heart as soon as you said it was from a cage to a graveyard. And so I want to talk about the loss that is visible, because we know that at least 40,000 Palestinians have been killed since the start of Israel's war. And that number is likely to be much, much higher. Some estimate in the hundreds of thousands. Once the true count of those who are buried under rubble or in areas that are inaccessible to medical teams are found. Al Jazeera Digital compiled the names of those accounted for in a video that's posted on social, and it lasts for about an hour. And more than 16,000 of those names are children. There are people who noted online in watching this video in the comments, it takes 20 minutes just to get past the names of kids. What does that do for the children who are still living, to be surrounded with that level of death on a daily basis?
It's terrifying. And it changes people deeply. I think that these people will have a difficult time to look at the world in a positive way in the future, because they will, although they don't understand all the sophistication of politics, they understand the pain, they sense the pain, and they will understand at a certain point that the world let this happen to them. And that will damage their capacity to trust in the future. Already we see some common symptoms and some extreme symptoms among the surviving children in Gaza. Many children suffer from mood and behavioral problems, regression, children who used to speak but now they cannot speak, children who suffer from bedwetting, nightmares, changes in appetite and sleep pattern. This is very common. But sometimes we were consulted on cases of catatonia, children who stopped moving completely. Motor symptoms, inability to walk, inability to move, and sometimes complete mutism, inability to speak. And sometimes children lost their hair dramatically. very quickly after bombardment. So there are very serious clinical, psychological symptoms that children experience. And I think in the future, when the physical threat subsides, people will be more in touch with their emotions, and we will see more symptoms.
Dr. Jabr, you're mentioning things that are incredibly visceral and also shocking, at least to me. So children who are catatonic, they're still alive, but they're catatonic. Others who've lost their hair.
Yes.
Do you have to go back to your medical books when you hear cases like this so you can refresh your memory on what this is and how this happened?
Well, there are things that we are confronted with now that I didn't study in textbooks, but we are seeing this. And I have to say, I've been working in Palestine as a psychiatrist for 18 years, and now people consult me. My colleagues consult me on some reactions and some presentations by their patients that I've never seen before.
Dr. Jabr names what Gaza's children struggle with, colonial trauma, after the break. So, Dr. Jabr, I last had a chance to talk to you on The Take in April 2022, so way before October 7th of 2023. And you were telling me about the fact that the types of horrors that many Palestinians face, they don't easily translate into the categories of post-traumatic stress because for Palestinians, there is no P, there is no post. It is ongoing. In some societies, I'm thinking of where I am, a car accident might cause trauma. A school shooting, which is very horrific, will cause trauma. But it's not even remotely the trauma that children in Gaza are experiencing as it's ongoing because there is no post. It never ends. So if not PTSD, how do you define this?
I think it's a colonial historical trauma, which is continuous, collective, cross-generational, and it passes from one generation to another. It's way more complex than PTSD, which has a clear beginning and a clear end. And also, the complex part of it is that it is deliberate. It is made for political purpose. It has an objective. And when trauma is man-made, the effect is much harsher on the psyche.
Wow.
And the ability of the victim of trauma to trust and to rebuild connection with others in the future.
So you mentioned that you're on the phone frequently in contact with both patients and medical professionals in Gaza. What do you advise them? What can they do to help kids who are struggling with colonial trauma, with knowing that there is no end and that it's not over and that it's intentional?
First, let me explain that it is difficult for mental health professionals themselves. All of them, all of those that I know, are internally displaced. Many of them lost family members and they lost their homes. A few managed to leave Gaza. A few were killed. So we understand that they are exhausted, depleted. The mental health services that they built over many years to respond to crisis was damaged, was demolished immediately. At the beginning, like in the first month, the one psychiatric hospital and governmental community mental health centers were crushed completely. My colleague who's the head of the psychiatric hospital, Dr. Abdullah Al-Jamal, told me that he has to go under the rubble of the hospital to find a box of medication for an agitated patient. They work with no medications. So what do we try to do? We listen with a lot of empathy and solidarity to our colleagues. We try to help the helpers. And then we try to respond to their needs. You can imagine there were in Gaza 40,000 patients known to our system there, to the mental health system. And these people were left alone with no connection to their doctors because of the danger of commuting from one place to another and the disconnection between in the geography of Gaza, the north and the south. The doctors and the therapists keep changing their place. So it is difficult for the patients to know where to go. Yeah. So it's a very complex situation. And yet, at the same time, today I was talking to another colleague from Gaza, Rauya. She told me we have to continue. It gives us hope. It gives us a sense and a meaning of life to continue working and offering something to our patients.
So I know that you're speaking to me from Nablus today to see patients at your clinic there.
Yes.
We've been talking about Gaza, but does Gaza and the less covered Israeli military raids and the settler attacks on residents of the occupied West Bank, does all of that come up in your sessions with your patients and in your contact with other health professionals?
Of course. I think the political is intertwined with the personal in Palestine, and people bring it to our attention in the sessions. And maybe against all expectations at the beginning of this year of genocide, my patients disappeared. Following October the 7th, my patients for a while disappeared. And they explained to me later on that they were embarrassed to talk about everyday complaints, the school performance of their kids, their fights with their in-laws when people were dying in Gaza.
Yeah.
And then patients who had stable mental health conditions, they started relapsing, missing sleep, binging on news, reacting strongly to what they learn happening in Gaza or in the West Bank. So we started seeing more people coming to the clinic. And then I was surprised by having new presentations in my clinic. I received a significant number of young people who stopped eating. They will come and say at the beginning, I can't eat because I have a thorn in my throat. I feel disgusted of food. And then when we allow them to speak, they will mention that my father was arrested and we know that prisoners are starved. Our brothers in Gaza, they eat animal food. We saw people being bombarded while making their bread, and the image of blood on bread makes me disgusted of eating anything. So that's a very significant clinical presentation that I never saw before. We see eating disorder, that's not very uncommon, but I call these cases as disordered eating because the body image component, which is important in eating disorders, is not there. I also received pregnant women or women who just delivered in postpartum depression. And when they try to rationalize their depression, they express feelings of guilt. They say, I'm making a big mistake to bring a child to this unsafe world. I'm bringing my child to genocide, and the genocide can be repeated in Jerusalem and the West Bank. If it happened to Gaza and it has not been stopped, why wouldn't it happen in the West Bank and Jerusalem? So this is just to give you a glimpse of how everyone, we are interconnected. We are socially and psychologically connected to each other. That's a big difference between Western psychology and Palestinian psychology. In Palestine, people talk about the collective mood. We are affected by what's happening on the ground. They talk about the pulse of the street, as if the street is one person and it has a pulse, as if the Palestinian community is one individual and it has a similar mood. And we cannot deny these observations in Palestine, even if they are not recognized by Western psychology.
Well, thank you for detailing that. I know there will be people who are watching this conversation on YouTube or listening to it, and they can relate because we're not there. And so many of us are in such privileged positions. And so then feelings of guilt, definitely what I've been feeling over this past year, feelings of guilt, looking at my now 2-year-old children and feeling so blessed, but also questioning why. I want to end back in Gaza because it's been 17 years since Israel imposed its siege on Gaza and over a year since October 7th. Even if a ceasefire were announced tomorrow, do the children of Gaza, do they have a chance to start a new page? If they remain stuck in this loop of war, what happens to them and their children and their children's children and the generations to come?
This is a very deep wound that will not be forgotten. It's a big scar that Palestinians will carry in the future. And it didn't start in October 2023. My grandmother was a victim in 48, a victim of the Nakba. And she got displaced from Jaffa. I have uncles who spent time in prison. They were tortured. So that's the story of every Palestinian. And if we manage to make it, I hope that the children of Gaza, they can make it. This doesn't minimize the impact of the wound. I think we should invest everything that we can invest for the recovery of the people in Gaza once there is ceasefire. But I hope that we can do many things to help them get over it and start their life from the rubble.
And that's The Take. Special thanks to our colleagues at Close Up for their original documentary we featured in this episode. Head to our social accounts at AJE Podcasts, where we'll add a link if you'd like to see more of their films. And if this conversation struck a chord, remember to subscribe to the Al Jazeera English channel here on YouTube.